bit of a abrupt ending there to the music. Okay, so we're at 1 p.m. here, and we'll start the MASA informational session. We'd like to thank Thomas, Heather, and Aaron for being here today to present with us on the topic of frameworks for maximizing educational and financial return on investment. Kind of starting us off will be Thomas Huberty from Trane, and he is a strategic energy solutions advisor. And just some logistics here. We will be recording the session, and we will send out the link to the recording and the slides to all the attendees and members who aren't able to attend in person at the moment. So with that, I'll turn it over to Thomas.
Good. Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you to MASA and all its members. We're looking forward to spending a little time with you all today. I want to share my screen. All right, can I just get like a thumbs up and make sure I'm sharing correctly? I'm working from a hotel in Chicago, so I just want to make sure I actually have the right screen. So as we go through today, a couple of housekeeping items too for our end. We do want to make this a little interactive, so we've got a couple of spots where we can ask some questions. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A. And keep in mind, we've got 45, 50 minutes. So what we're going to do is provide some high-level frameworks and some ideas. By no means is this intended to be all-inclusive going deep. So any of us are available afterwards. If you want to follow up, we can get into the weeds with you on any of the particulars in our session today. So as Dave mentioned, my name is Thomas Huberty. I am a strategic energy solutions advisor with Trane Technologies. I am a class of 91 graduate of Fergus Falls High School in West Central Minnesota. So a homegrown guy. I currently office out of the Twin Cities and cover kind of the upper Midwest region for Trane. So the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan, and Illinois for their education vertical. So with that, I will let Aaron, you want to introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Hello, good afternoon. Aaron Smith. That's one of my favorite things about the virtual world. Your name is right there in the corner, so that keeps it easy as we're going through this afternoon. I have a varied background. I studied chemistry and French, and then earned a master's degree in environmental science. So I have a lot of different passions, as you can see. I actually worked in education as a secondary ed teacher in chemistry. I did that in Indiana when I lived there, and then also here in Wisconsin, where I reside now in Black River Falls. I moved to Trane, and now I'm a training program manager, where I work with our early talent development programs for energy engineers, contracting project managers, and I do technical training for our sales engineers. I'm really passionate about developing our young people, and I've moved from one segment of our kind of societal group to another in doing that with Trane, but exciting to be part of a company that values that development so highly, both in the early talent that we bring in as a company, but also then with the educational groups that we partner with.
Thank you, Aaron. Heather?
Okay, great. My name is Heather Casperson. I am not with Trane. I am with PFM Financial Advisors. I bring over 25 years of financial advisory experience with me. In the vein what Thomas said, I am a graduate of the Osseo School District 279. So I am a Minnesotan. Been here pretty much the entire time of my 25 years and then 25 additional years of just being around. Happy to bring the finance perspective to the conversation today, and looking forward to the discussion with everyone. I also, in addition to being part of the conversation with financing, oh, hey, Park Center grad, thank you very much. Appreciate that shout out. I also, in my spare time, am on the board for Ragam, which is a rescue with golden retrievers. So again, just thanks for having us today.
Awesome, thank you. There we go. So for agenda today, we wanted to take a second at the beginning, just kind of have a little chat. If you can put some response, if you've got a question on the next slide, on some of what your goals are. I want to take a minute just to talk about why Trane is here and why Trane, who you may or may not be familiar with, is engaged in the types of things we're talking about workforce development, STEM education, social outcomes, and facilities-related projects. We'll have a little bit of discussion on what the current environment is that we're seeing out there, talk about some frameworks to drive alignment among stakeholders, specifically looking at how do you drive an educational return on investment in your plan or future facilities investments. How do you drive social outcomes through that, and how does that help address local workforce development goals? We'll have a couple of minutes discussion on how to integrate that process and those outcomes into your facilities project. Heather will help us out, walk us through some financing and funding options that are available. We'll talk about next steps, and like I mentioned at the outset, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So with that, where we'd like to start is just to get a sense from you guys, what are some of the big goals that your districts are tackling? What's on your short-term horizon, and kind of what, if any, road barriers or barriers do you have to achieving them? Maybe if you could put some responses in the chat, that would be great. And Dave, can I ask you to kind of moderate those? See if we get any. We'll give it a second or two and see if we can get some responses. Anything? We got a quiet group today. Otherwise, we start calling on people. All right, I see Mark. You're on my screen as a name. Anything, Mark or Jeff?
Thomas, I can jump in and speak to what our goals were during my time in Black River. Oh, we have a response here. Excellent.
All right.
We've got Jeff Bertrand. He responded with, I'm a retired superintendent who consults with area schools in southern Minnesota. I haven't heard of any real issues with facilities or projects at this time. I'm guessing projects to replace facilities are a priority.
All right, that's very true. They're always a priority, right? And it's a never-ending need. There are a lot of unique vehicles that the current environment has enabled for school districts to take advantage of some state and federal funding to drive multiple outcomes. So, Aaron, I'm going to take you up on your offer in a second. But I want to just take a quick step back, I guess. Most people in the marketplace, when they hear of Trane, maybe they think of air conditioners or chillers. Really Trane Technologies as a global entity is a pure climate play company. Trane is one of the brands underneath the Trane Technologies umbrella, along with Thermo King. So you have kind of your built environment, heating and cooling with Trane, and transportation side with Thermo King. But I put up on the screen my group in particular in energy services, and what my role is really helping drive some of these sustainability outcomes that Trane Technologies has signed on to. So on the screen is our 2030 sustainability commitments. On the far left, you've got customer outcomes. I think one that's pretty easy to tie to Trane is reducing customers' emissions by a gigaton, or we call it our gigaton challenge. That's the combined emissions of France, the UK, and Italy. So just put it in kind of order of magnitude for you. But a couple that I wanted to touch on are on the right when you talk about community and our investment in the STEM workforce development and retraining. Trane Technologies has pledged $100 million to advance STEM education, especially targeting underrepresented groups, disadvantaged youth, etc. And then under the people too, looking at gender parity and developing a diverse workforce is something that Trane's committed to the marketplace. And that's really how I'm measured within our organizations, helping drive in those outcomes for our customers. So with that, there's a change that's going on in the marketplace, and I'm going to use some words today like ESG, and we might even throw sustainability in there. And I just want to put the caveat on there that when we use those words, I'm trying to use it as an illustrative framework for how you can gain alignment. Definitely not looking at any of the potential political connotations that go into those words, right? When you think of, call it what you'd like, climate change, sustainability, the reality is if you follow legislation, where are codes going, follow dollars, where are the incentives right now that are available, and really where's business going? There's been we have $1 trillion of risk that have been identified on the commercial side or the corporate side, that we are looking for the workforce of the future to be able to find those people that can help solve those problems for us. So it's real, it's relevant. And at the end of the day, it's about thinking about your investments, perhaps less from the green side of things or the political side of green, and really the dollars, right? What's happening to your utility rates, where are incentives available, and how do you drive a strong and resilient workforce within your local community? So it's about workforce development and money. And I think historically, a lot of construction and facilities investment, specifically in K-12, has been driven by kind of that first cost, right? It's all about the capital, the dollars. You replace things on failure. You may do an energy project, and then you try to kind of explain what the sustainability or the green aspects were of that. And what we're seeing collectively, not just in Minnesota, but really across the country, is the need to drive and activate your local community of stakeholders, right? How do you advance other outcomes beyond just fixing a widget, changing out a boiler, whatever the case may be in your building, to drive some of those social outcomes? So, looking at how do you use your capital as efficiently as possible? How do you engage your stakeholders? There is more incentive out there to drive decarbonization efforts. And we've got a couple of slides in particular that'll talk to some of those dollars that may be available for that. And then, how do you tie in that component of workforce development at the end of the day? How do you create a workforce that's going to be ready for the future, prepared for the jobs that are going to be there, and do that in a way that creates access and opportunity for all? So when I mention ESG, again, think of it as that framework, right? Of the environmental aspects of that, where you're looking at things like energy efficiency, water efficiency, reducing carbon, all of those. At the end of the day, those are dollars, right? The less money you spend on energy is more money you can contribute to hiring a new teacher, hiring new staff, opening a new program, et cetera, creating access opportunities. There's that social piece of it, right? Career pathways. How do you develop that workforce? How do you prepare students for the next phase in their life, whether that's a workforce or continued education? And then how do you manage your own organization internally, right? And if you think of that as the framework, that really can help drive some engaging conversations with stakeholders. And on this slide, we're just trying to show a little bit of all the various stakeholders that you might have in your district, right? You've got educators. Some are concerned about ESG and sustainability, some aren't. You have STEM educators specifically. You've got that whole students. You have a need to attract and retrain your staff. And then when you look at kind of the management, put this into K-12, you've got finance, procurement, facilities. Depending on the size of your district, you might have specific energy and community folks in there. You've got executive leadership, you all on this call, and you have a school board, right? On the periphery, or maybe not so much on the periphery, but on the side, you also have various community stakeholders. Some are more engaged than others, but when it comes time to do a referendum, for instance, you need to be able to align those stakeholders in that community in support of that. And then you have your local officials, right? Whether that's, from a municipality standpoint, state, et cetera. And what we're seeing a lot of now is the impact that some of these dollars, as they trickle down from the federal government, the impact that they're having locally and the opportunities that exist for you all within your organization. So think of the ESG framework focus on dollars and workforce development and jobs, and you can accomplish green goals if that's what your district has, right? If you want to decarbonize, that's great. If not, you're still going to be saving money, and you're still going to be enabling students to have access to careers of the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron to kind of walk us through what some of those educational return on investment, social outcomes are, and how we look at them as an organization.
Thank you, Thomas. So coming from an education background, one of the key things that I saw as a challenge as an educator was ensuring that I was equipping my students for that next phase of life, whether they were going on to a 4-year or a 2-year degree, or they were looking to enter the workforce. How do I best equip them for those opportunities? And then how do they get the best exposure to knowing what those opportunities are? So as a chemistry teacher, I recognized my end goal wasn't for them to understand electron orbitals. It was far bigger than that, about equipping them for their next phase of life. And what's been exciting working with Trane is watching how they are doing that integrally to working with the education market. What you're seeing here is how we can put those pieces together, looking to equip our students and help them gain visibility for what the opportunities are moving forward. How do we do that along the whole path? So starting at a young age with some good STEM exposure, continuing that through middle school and high school, and then starting to kind of increase the rigor of the programs that Trane has to offer, where we are actually utilizing the building and the infrastructure to be a learning opportunity for students. Really exciting to give our students the opportunity to learn in a really tangible, relevant way, and putting the pieces of, I'm sitting in a brick and mortar building, but how does that really fit in with what I'm learning? One of the biggest questions I would get as a teacher was, when am I ever going to use this again? And when you can make that learning really fit with what am I sitting in right now at the moment, whether that's, a 5th grader learning about energy and how it's used in their classroom, or if you're talking about someone who's in high school and they're starting to understand how a building and the way that it functions can be part of a career moving forward. Trane has some really awesome opportunities for doing each of those things. Next slide, Thomas. So I'll take some time then to kind of walk you through the various programs that we have and what educational level they really work with. So we have this one called the BTU crew. What we're using is that kind of a play on words for our unit for heat. And this is an educational program that goes from 3rd grade all the way up through high school. And it really is an excellent way to engage the students, but then open up their eyes to the opportunities that they would have for STEM down the road. One of the great things about this, as well as the other programs that we'll talk to here in just a moment, is that they, as I mentioned before, they're very real, they're very tangible, because we're talking about energy. So let's look at the energy that's utilized in the lights that are in my classroom and in the rest of the school. But they're also very accessible and easy for teachers, and they're easily stacked on the curriculum that is already being used, the science standards that are already in place. So it isn't something separate that's being plugged in. It is something that ties directly to the education that is happening there. As a previous educator, that was an awesome tool to find things that really brought relevance to it, and know that it wasn't something that was a separate thing, but I could really tie it into my lesson plans and what I was doing. So this BTU crew curriculum is a really great way to pull students in, help them understand what energy is, how we're using energy, and that's a place where you're using the building then as a learning tool. that's a new and exciting place that I've been working with Trane to really tie that building into those learning opportunities. Something that we don't often think about. How do I use, I'm putting in a new heating system, or I'm updating this portion of my building, and then I can use that actual infrastructure change to teach the students more about STEM, more about career opportunities in the future, and how we can work well together with buildings and our community to really be more sustainable. So BTU crew, really great thing that covers a wide range of ages and really helps to drive an excitement around STEM that feels real in the world that our students are learning in. Our next program is a really exciting partnership with Trane and NC3, or the National Coalition of Certification Centers. You see a whole bunch of different industries there at the bottom that are listed that are partnering with NC3 and schools. Really, this is where education and industry are coming together and hand in hand helping to drive both improvements in infrastructure, but really in education and preparing our students for the workforce. This is really helping to fill that gap between technical education and the skills that are needed in the workforce. I mentioned equipping our students to be ready for that next step in life, and finding a way to ensure that they have the skill set that our companies and our workforce is looking for. NC3, then lots of various certifications that can be achieved, particularly with Trane. It is where Trane is actually helping put labs, HVAC labs, into schools to provide students with that specialized training so that they have these certifications that tie directly to a very highly in-demand role in a growing industry, and equips them well for their future. One of the exciting things about Trane and these certifications is how data-driven our world is now, and how Trane is really on the cutting edge of putting controls and data analytics in with what's happening in our buildings, but then also what's happening in the educational programs that we are using. And NC3 is a great example of that. So someone that isn't just well equipped in certifications to turn a wrench, but has a really a well equipped skill set so that they are working in really the digital and data driven world that we have now. So, and the next slide. We also have this VL3, or virtual learning labs, where the building becomes the lab that we are utilizing to help educate our students. And this is something that can be done in high schools, community colleges, so runs a breadth of ages, and it's using buildings, the building data, and that becomes the learning opportunity, the lab for our students. It enables them to be able to look at real world scenarios and learn from that how to solve complex technical problems, and ties their learning into skills that translate really well to jobs. It also is a way that they start to see their community, the building that they're in, that they're using as a lab, but then their community and the greater infrastructure that they're living in, and understand the way that that fits with the energy that we're using and the data that we're able to utilize to make improvements across the board. So next slide. We're I'm bringing you back full circle here, where you can see that we are tying with multiple grade levels, and at each point along the way, tying that STEM, highly technical learning as you get older into the data that is driving our communities, the energy that's being used. How do we understand where that fits? How do we understand for our students, help them understand how that building is really impacting their environment whether it's hot or cold, but then also the energy that's being used and how that impacts their community. So data is really tying a bunch of these different educational programs together, creates really exceptional development in STEM, and also that awareness. What opportunities are there in the future as a technician, technical learning, maybe as an energy engineer? It really opens their eyes and exposes them to a lot of various opportunities. And the data piece with the analytics really ties them into what is the cutting edge of technology and where our world is headed. Opportunities for data analytics that are on the cusp of what is new in our communities and where we see a lot of growth in opportunities for jobs. So equipping our students well and using that infrastructure to do that. Thank you, Thomas.
Button. There we go. Found the unmute button. Thanks, Aaron. I want to take a couple of minutes here and we'll walk through, how do you drive those outcomes, right? We talked about some of the educational opportunities and those tie-ins that are available for students. And next, we want to talk about the types of projects or the type of work that can actually leverage to accomplish those goals. So a lot of talk in the market about decarbonization, a lot of articles. The reality, whether your goal is to truly decarbonize or your goal is to just make your operations operate as efficiently as possible, the slide kind of walks through a good flow down, right? If you start with looking at areas just to reduce your energy consumption, how do you lower those utility bills on a monthly basis? The on-site emissions, probably a little more dedicated to a true decarbonization path. But the reality of there are operational costs and things like refrigerants. If you haven't had experience with them, there are refrigerants that are being phased out. So if you have some of those legacy systems, it's not that your equipment won't work. However, you're definitely going to want to look at how do you minimize leaks, et cetera, because as those resources become scarcer and scarcer, they become much more expensive. So you're looking at some potential future cost increases. Renewable energy, we've got solar on schools here in Minnesota as an example. Just an opportunity. That's an awesome opportunity to drive some educational initiatives for your students. And then lastly, how do you tackle some of those other harder to abate emissions? The time horizon on these things, when you think of, if there's goals or incentives to be carbon neutral by 2040, 2050 even, think of in the mindset that the decisions you're making in your built environment, those pieces of equipment are probably going to be around 20, 30 years from now. So enabling yourself for the future as utility prices might fluctuate and the cost of carbon might increase, keep that in the back of your mind. So the approach that Trane has, and really whether it's Trane or any partner that you work with, they should be able to help you kind of drive around a couple of core competencies. And that's, how do you help facilitate kind of that organizational alignment, both internally and externally with stakeholders to get support for projects and initiatives that you might have. Obviously, you need the facilities engineering piece of it, the technical know-how. That's the in the grand scheme of things, that technical piece is probably the easiest piece, right? If you know what your challenge is and what your solutions are, you have to find the right environment or the right tools to achieve that. I think one of the big pieces is that financial piece. How do you find or define a program and go down a path that's, it's financially attainable, that works within your budget, then still can accomplish those goals you have, not just for the building itself, but also some of the social impacts, and how do you blend those into your project? So, we kind of walk through a process where we start with some on-site interviews, trying to just engaging customers. We do the technical piece, provide some detailed information. We then develop those out completely, and then follow up after implementation with, how do we measure and verify what we've got? So on this graphic, you can kind of see that timeline, if you will, or that flow where you might have, certain goals that you're starting with. And that first part is just kind of inventory all those ideas, and all those little bubbles represent a potential project or a potential initiative that you want to engage in as a district. That's about really inventorying stakeholders and finding out what's important to them. It's helping drive that alignment. You then want to look at, what's the feasibility of these, right? What can we tackle? What makes sense? What doesn't? You'll start ranking them, stacking them, bundling them. One of the big things that, myself, Heather, especially is, we're working with a lot of districts on, all right, how do we leverage some of these funding tools that are available through Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera? So how do you use those as accelerants? And then lastly, kind of that program management, execution, and then most importantly, measuring the results at the end of the day. This slide really isn't an all-inclusive list. It's designed more to be representative. But if you think of all the different types of projects that you're having to complete in your district and in your buildings, any one of these could be turned into an educational opportunities for students. There are countless opportunities to engage students, not only in the outcomes or the results of what's happening, but we actually work a lot with schools on the design side and help them understand design decisions, implementation, construction, et cetera. There are opportunities that abound, and this is kind of a list just to give you kind of that holistic look at like my group. When I talked about energy services for Trane, these are the types of projects that we're doing on a regular basis here in the state of Minnesota. So with that, I will turn it over to Heather to walk through some of the financing and funding options that are available.
Thank you. So far, most of this presentation, for me, hasn't focused on what maybe many of you may think of when you hear or read the word the company Trane. When I was first introduced to Thomas and Aaron, part of the local Minnesota team, I thought it was the thermostat on the wall of my office. I was not thinking of visual learning labs. So a few slides ago, there were some typical projects that you might see associated with Trane. The common ones, maybe the ones that you think of, the LED lighting, the HVAC, the boilers, the chillers. The ones that I think maybe are a little more interesting, the biomass, the green roofs, the geothermal, and even the low flow toilets. But regardless of what project you might think of, what comes to your head, or what is applicable to your school district, you are going to need to find a way to finance them, because I can assure you there's no extra pot of money at any school district just to fund these projects. So what we're going to talk about over these next couple of slides, they will present some common finance statutes for Minnesota schools. And I don't plan on going over each one in depth. And as Dave mentioned in the beginning, we will be providing this as a handout to you. So we're just going to hit the highlights for the ones that are the most applicable and most used. So on this slide, these two, school building bonds and long-term facilities maintenance, these are the most common financing tools. So for example, last year in 2023, 38% of all bonds issued by Minnesota school districts were school building bonds. 29% were facilities maintenance bonds. So together that accounted for 67% of publicly issued debt by Minnesota schools. If we go back one more year, 2022, school building bonds accounted for 48% of all debt issued on behalf of Minnesota schools. Facilities maintenance bonds was 26%. So now we're up to 74% of all publicly issued debt in just these two categories. So because I'm a Minnesotan and I'm a hockey fan, for a hat trick, let's do one more year. 2021 school building bonds were 33% of debt issued, and facilities maintenance bonds were 24%. So that gives us a total of 57%. So now consistently for 3 years, over half of publicly issued debt for Minnesota schools, at least in the last 3 years, because I'm not going to make assumptions for going back, have been in these two categories. So does anyone want to take a guess why that is? And I know we don't have a whole lot of time here, so I will just say, I think this slide, looking at it, I think you can tell. So school building bonds, they have the broadest authority. They qualify for the state's credit enhancement program, which at the current time is a AAA rating by S&P, and that's the highest credit rating offered. It's a AA1 by Moody's Investor Service, which is one notch below the highest credit rating offered. So that provides pretty low borrowing rates for school districts. There's also a school building bond agricultural credit right now, which is 70%, which can be really helpful for districts that have agricultural land that helps to pass the required referendum vote, because as you can see, school building bonds have an election required. So turning to facilities maintenance bonds, where an election is not required, it may be necessary if the $380 per pupil unit revenue does not cover the project needs at hand. There are also additional funds available if the project is indoor air quality, asbestos abatement, fire alarm suppression, if it's over 100,000 at any one site. I will mention that both of these types of financings do require your school district to go through processes with the Commissioner of the Department of Education in advance of issuing debt. For school building bonds, it's a review and comment process for any project that is over $2 million at one school site. I'm going to assume that there are not capital loan school districts on this call. Capital loan districts are 500,000. Facilities maintenance bonds, you have to do a 10-year facilities plan, and you have to submit that in advance, and you have to update that annually. Next slide, please. So for the next two types of bonds, we have abatement bonds and certificates of participation. So certificates of participation are also called COPs, and they are the third most used category of publicly issued debt by Minnesota schools. In 2023 and 2022, 9% of all issuance was COP. However, if we go back one more year, in 2021, COPs accounted for 24% of publicly issued debt by Minnesota schools. Abatement bonds are a little less used because they have a smaller range of project uses. The statistics on abatement bonds are in 2023, they were accounted for approximately 3%, ticking up when we go back one more year in 22 with 8% and in 2021, when you look at abatement bonds alone, they were 3%, but in 2021, there were a lot of bond issues that were combinations of different authorities. So that's all, that would be like, say, using abatement bonds with school building bonds or any other combination of bonds. So again, elections are not required for either of these types of bonds. Next slide, please. Now we have capital equipment certificates and capital facilities bonds or notes. Neither of these require an election to use these financing tools. The caveat for these, though, is that they are repaid using district's general fund levy, so you do not have access to funds for additional funds rather for debt service. That was all I was going to say about this slide. You can go on. The next slide talks about referendum options, and these will both require elections, and they're limited to a maximum of 10 years if the referendums are passed. Thank you. So this slide talks about the review and comment requirements. So again, we talked a little bit about review and comment back in the slide where we talked about school building bonds. This talks about the types of bonds that require review and comment. School building bond, some facility bonds, if you do pass a referendum for facility bonds, a capital project referendum, abatement bonds, a capital loan or grant. Again, capital loans are districts, there are very strict requirements of those, and very few districts really qualify for those, and an installment contract or lease agreement. Again, these are for projects that will be $2 million in one site, and again, $500,000 for a capital loan district. And there's more information here on this slide for you to take back with you. You can continue, thank you again. So here's a slide with the capital loans, and then also some information on the agricultural credit. Okay, thank you. Okay, and Thomas, I think we're gonna go back to you.
Yeah, perfect. I did want to just share, all these slides will be shared. We'll put them in the chat at the end, and I believe Dave is going to facilitate getting those out to the group as well. So a couple of, I mentioned legislative opportunities you hopefully are somewhat aware of, at least at this point. But if not, in the Inflation Reduction Act.
Hello. Hi, Christine. How you doing? Good. So, Loy Wolber told me that you are the go-to. So I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the right data. My business manager, she had 2 children that were killed in a car accident 2 weeks ago. And
Oh, no.
so she's out, and our retired business manager
Can you help us?
like overseas, so she can't help. And so we're in a kind of a pickle right now.
Wow.
I'm looking at our data, and during our negotiations this morning or yesterday morning, our Education Minnesota person said, well, I don't know if you're looking at the right information. I'm like, well, this is what I
The only
had
one
from
that's
last
hearing this
spring.
conversation right now.
So basically, I'm just looking at the levy certification report.
Thank you. Thank you. So in the Inflation Reduction Act, in 2022, there's a couple of things that changed. There's a 48 ITC specifically, which is a tax credit that's been around for years. Primarily was geared towards solar and taxable entities where they'd actually get a credit. So a couple of the big things that changed. One, those tax credits, the amount of them have grown. You can actually get up to 50% based on the type of work you're doing and where you're located, and a few other requirements. Generally, they're going to range from some 30 to 50%, but they also expanded what they're good for. So not just solar, but things like geothermal, biogas, microgrids, combined heat and power, wind, all those things, thermal storage. And then most importantly for this audience is they are now able to be monetized for tax exempt organizations. So you actually, there's a direct pay process where the IRS will actually distribute a check back in lieu of a credit for you. On the other side of the slide, we got 179D tax deduction. Again, this is a deduction that's been around for a while. This is it's looking at how energy use intensity within your building, so how far you reduce that EUI number. The key takeaways is they've lowered the baseline percentages, so you don't have to have as much of a savings as you used to. And the incentive now range, it used to max out at about $1 a square foot. Those now max out at $5 a square foot. So there's some opportunities to drive some real savings. You know, and this for Trane at least, these are designed for your designers or your implementers as a tax credit. One of the things we do with our partners is we do share those with our clients. We had a customer, actually a university, but we actually just delivered them a $271,000 check, which can help you either buy down that project, retire debt, or increase scope or add program staff, etc. One other little item hot off the press. I don't know if you guys saw this last week, but the Department of Energy and specifically their state and community energy program group had a kickoff webinar with the IRA and all of these federal incentives that are currently trickling down through the states and into our local communities. The Department of Energy is making a big emphasis on promoting opportunities within energy savings performance contracting. And I'm not going to take the time right now to go into what all those are. If you want to have the discussions, we can. But I think it's important just because generally speaking, when the federal government wants to promote something, there are dollars and incentives that come along with that. So something to keep your eyes out. The big goal that the DOE has is to reduce $1 billion worth of energy costs out of public entities, local government, school districts, etc. Here in the United States. So this is through 2008. So it's a 4-year campaign that they have going on. And you can kind of see one thing I want to point out is at least for us, we are one of the early supporters of that. And the DOA recognized that in their recent webinar that they did. So there's a whole series of events that are going to be taking place over the next 12 to 18 months. But it is something to think about how you can leverage some of those IRA dollars to use it a little bit as a flywheel, right? To be able to accomplish some of the things that your district may not have been able to accomplish historically, and kind of spin those up to get to scope and scale quickly. One thing to point on too, most all of you are members or familiar with kind of the group purchasing. Omnia Partners, which is formerly U.S. Communities, is an opportunity for you guys to address procurement challenges that you might have in your district. But I think most importantly, it allows you to save the time, ensure you're getting a fair deal, and really get the projects you want. So at the end of the day, you're not stuck to the street and the responses that you might have on bid day. So if you are looking to drive some of the educational add-ons within your project, or have decarbonization or sustainability goals that you want to address, it gives you an opportunity to ensure that in a compliant procurement path, you're able to get those items that you want. So Omni Partners is a way to help speed up, but also support stakeholders and ensure that you're getting a fair deal on those projects. So as we get towards the end here, we wanted to kind of throw another question out to the group. We've talked a lot about different projects, different funding. Are there any projects that you guys might be contemplating within your district that might be able to fit into an educational ROI type pathway? And are there opportunities to leverage federal or state incentives in those? Anybody want to be bold and share with the group? All right, so no one wants to share, but it's something to think about as you look at projects that might be on your 10-year capital plan, right? Your LTFM, or needs for additional space, additional schools, expansion, growth within the district. Think about ways to tie in some of those additional benefits around an educational opportunity for your students. Make your buildings become a part of the solution and a part of that educational opportunity to really create pathways for your students with real and relevant information that clearly addresses their need for what's important or why it is important in their community. Why are they learning this? It's a part of that building that they're learning in. So great opportunity to kind of get a 2-for-1 on your investments. So look at some of the next steps. Think about who some of the key leaders are within your organizations. I would also encourage look at externally, key stakeholders within your community. Talk about what are some desired outcomes. What groups should be at the table? Who should we include in this? How can we tie or address the needs or desires of multiple stakeholders, with one process or one project? Define what those metrics are going to be at the end. How are you going to know if you succeeded? And then start crafting on a timeline. And then, obviously, especially if you're doing the referendum, you guys fully understand the need to communicate that approach with your constituents. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about sharing knowledge, engaging your stakeholders, and identifying your priorities throughout that process. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes or so. I wanted to just say thank you to everyone. All our contact information is on the screen. And really, if we could, Dave, can we just unmute everybody and see if anybody's got any questions, and we can just have a conversation.
I mean, we can unmute everyone. I don't know if it's we want to just
Yeah,
mask
that.
automatically, but they have the ability to unmute if they want to
All right.
run it all. So yeah.
Yeah, I know as a new superintendent, I know there's a lot of different funding options and opportunities that I'm just not aware of, and that's part of kind of being part of this meeting is what are some other opportunities. Being in a small rural district, we obviously the ag to school credit's huge for us, right? Being in the Southwest, but being being in a larger city environment where they have more parking lots, for example, that might be a way of piecing those things together that I wasn't aware of prior. I've heard it a couple different school finance meetings, but I know there's probably other opportunities. I continually get phone calls for busing, to do more green busing, and I don't know what's out there for grants or if they're easy to get to or federal funding, or if the buses during Minnesota winters are not too kind. Are they that effective when you got to drive a bus for an hour or back and forth? It's those kind of things. That is there true value in that? I think is one of the concerns that I have as well that I don't know enough about.
Yeah, no, I mean, and Robert, thank you. It's valid, right? I mean, those are concerns. So, you asked a couple of nuanced questions there, but I'll say yes, there are dollars available for that. I think you made the comment, are they easy? That's a different question altogether, but they are available. That's the specifically in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act piece of some of the recent legislation. You know, there are, and we had to kind of for this group, right? We're very high level. And we wanted to stick to kind of the things that were available for all, right? But there are literally hundreds of various programs. You mentioned the rural district, right? There are specific USDA and DOE grants for rural institutions. I believe in the state of Minnesota, they're standing up somewhere in the neighborhood of 86 new programs. In the Department of Commerce right now, they're all as a result of some of this legislation that's came down the federally.
How are those opportunities shared with us? Or who do we contact to get updates on those financial opportunities that we don't have any way of doing? I mean, I have a grant writer. I don't have her writing anything right now because I don't know what's out there to send her way to say, hey, we could use some help here. Where do we get those if we're not part of any mailer or you know, kind of context?
Yeah, there's within the state of Minnesota, if you go to the Department of Commerce, they do have I don't remember it. I've been there and I've registered for it myself. They have a link to like a newsletter type thing where they are doing updates about every 2 weeks on some of the new stuff that's coming out. I also see Dave and Lori's picture. MASA can probably help shepherd that. And I did see Heather raise her hand, and I'll raise my hand as well, right? Kind of the shameless plug. But you know, it is the world that we're working in. And I will be totally honest with you, Robert. I don't know everything because it's a lot of it's still evolving ourselves, right? Some of it has new guidance, some of it doesn't. It is a challenge. It's a challenge for those of us that, you know, deal with it every day, you know, as well. But the Department of Commerce is probably the easiest, at least Minnesota specific stuff. You know, and then reach out to your partners. You know, your partners should be able to help identify some of those opportunities, whether they're, you know, competitive grants, you know, some of the tax saving stuff, rebates, where to get those and how to, you know, a lot of it becomes too, it's how you structure your project, right? You want to make sure that you're kind of dotting your I's and crossing your T's especially with the IRA, right? There's different ways you can design systems, for instance, to take advantage of additional IRA dollars. I can think of an example. We had a school district that was looking at doing a chiller upgrade. It was about a $500,000 upgrade. We worked with them on some alternative solutions where we not only were able to drive higher efficiency chillers, but also thermal storage into their system. And that ended up being about a $750,000 solution. But then they were also eligible for 40% IRA tax deduction. So net investment, they got more efficient chillers, the resiliency aspects, and the cost or demand shedding opportunities of thermal storage, and it ended up costing net less dollars than it would have going the alternative route. So there's some important nuances there, just system design and how you're laying things out.
Okay. Yeah, we have a building referendum special vote here in May, and I'm sure Heather, one of your competitors, is I'm working for right now as we get ready for that. But you know, as the more and more I'm in these meetings, the more money I hear money is out there, but I don't even know where to begin. So I think that's the context of what that looks like, right?
Yeah. It is a challenge staying on top of it. And even unfortunately, once you think you have it figured out, Robert, the government will probably come out with some new guidance and change something along the way. So,
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else have thoughts, comments, ideas?
All right, well, we are getting to the end of the hour, and I just want to thank you again. My apologies for arriving late. We were just finishing our MASA legislative session. So thanks to Dave for helping kick things off, and Tom, thanks to you and your team of folks for stepping in to share with us. I know school finance is always a challenging conversation. So when we have partners who are willing and able to come and help us navigate some of that work, it's really appreciated. So many thanks. I know Dave has an evaluation that, Dave, did you want to share that now, or are you going to share it when you send out the recording?
Put it in the chat, but I mentioned that I would include it in the recording along with the slides.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for being here today.
Perfect. And as you wrap up, I just hit send on the deck. So that's uploading to the chat as well.
Perfect.
For anyone if they want to download that.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.